welcome to the first chapter. This chapter nicely builds on each topic to give you a solid, high-level understanding of Java. At the end of the chapter, we will also run our first Java program. We begin the chapter by broadly defining what Java is. We will next discuss the motivation behind creating Java. This should help us understand why certain features that are unique to Java were introduced. And one of the features is platform independence. But before learning about platform independence, we need to first understand what platform dependency is. In the process, we also learn about what compilation is, which should be very useful for complete beginners. But to understand platform independence, we also need to understand about interpretation, as it helps achieve platform independence. So we discuss about interpreters. Then we discuss about how Java achieves platform independence. We then take a look at JVM, which is kind of the soul of Java platform. Very important topic, and we also have a separate dedicated chapter to it. Java software family involves multiple platforms for developing applications for different types of devices like web servers, desktops, and mobile devices. Java SE is one of the platforms and is also a core platform within the Java family. And this course is about Java SE platform. So we will install Java SE and the entire installation process will be demonstrated step by step. Finally, we will code our first Java program and compile and execute it. So that's the agenda. Note that coding exercises, or in other words practice activities, will actually start from next chapter. That's because this chapter is basically a high-level introduction to what Java is. And so it is more on theory side. Although we write a basic hello world program at the end of the chapter, the real language features will be introduced only from next chapter onwards. So you will get to see coding exercises only from next chapter onwards. And a coding exercise is basically a problem for which you will provide a solution. And you can expect at least one coding exercise per chapter where you would put some of the important stuff you learned in that chapter into practice. But keep in mind that I will be demonstrating almost all of the concepts in code. And it would be really helpful if you can also implement them on your end. Again, the demos and the coding exercises will start from next chapter onwards. Now, without any further delay, let's get started with the chapter, and it is going to be an exciting introduction to Java. Thank you. Compilation is a very fundamental concept in computer science, and if you're new to programming and not completely sure about what compilation is, then this short discussion on compilation should be very helpful. But if you're already familiar with programming and clearly understand what compilation is, then feel free to skip this lecture. Let's start with absolute basic concepts of a computer. Every computer has a fixed set of instructions that it understands, and collectively they are referred to as the instruction set of a computer. So the CPU would understand these instructions, and a computer program is made up of some of these instructions. That is, the instructions help a computer program to perform something meaningful. Each instruction tells the CPU to perform certain action. And each instruction is basically a sequence of zeros and ones. That is, an instruction has a binary format. And such instructions that computer understands is called as machine language. That is the language which a machine understands, just like the way we humans understand our languages. Machine language is also referred to as machine code and is sometimes also referred to as native code. And here is an example machine instruction which performs addition operation. The 6 digits on the right specify that it is an add operation. Now, a computer program would involve many such instructions. And obviously, it would be very frustrating for someone to write and also read such instructions. which have only zeros and ones. Okay, so it's very cumbersome and it's got to be simpler than this. So computer scientists came up with another language called assembly language, which was much more easier to read and write. And here is an example to add two numbers, which is much more expressive than the machine code. So assembly language provides certain higher level notations for writing instructions, like add in this case. But computers understand only machine language. They do not understand assembly language. So there's a program called assembler that translates assembly language instructions into machine language instructions, which a computer can understand. Now both machine language and assembly language are referred to as low-level languages, and that's because they use low-level details of a computer. One example would be specifying the memory location where we are storing data. But writing programs even in assembly language is still tedious. So programmers wanted programs to be expressed in a more easier way. And they also wanted to hide low-level details. So in time, they came up with high-level languages. And some example high-level languages include Fortran, C, C++, Java, and C#. And they use English-like words like public, private, and so on, mathematical notations like plus and minus, and punctuations to write programs. So they're much more easier to write and read, as we will see in this course. And here is an example Java program. As you can see, it uses English words like public and addition operation here using the symbol plus and a punctuation here in the form of semicolon. And of course, they also hide low-level details of the computer. So today, we mostly use only high-level programming languages. Assembly language is not used very much and is used only where performance is critical, like in the case of operating systems of electronic devices. And in terms of terminology, source code is the term that is used to refer to any code expressed in a programming language. So source code is nothing but the programs that we write, like the Java program that we see here. And many times in this course, I would be using the term source code. Now, like in the case of assembly language, source code cannot also be understood by a computer. So we need to translate source code into machine language. And that's where compiler comes in. So the translation from source code to machine code is done by this program called compiler. Machine code, which is the executable program, is then executed directly by CPU in a separate step. So compilation and execution are two different steps. First, compilation is performed in order to translate source code into machine code, and then separately the machine code will be executed. Now note that in this illustration, we are calling the translated language as target language and not machine language. That's because in some cases it may be something else too. For example, in the case of C or C++, target language would be machine code. However, in Java's case, it is Java bytecode, which will be discussed later. Sometimes target language can also be another programming language. For example, ClojureScript is a language and it comes with a compiler which compiles ClojureScript programs into JavaScript, okay, which is a different language. Such compilers are also referred to as source-to-source compilers or transcompilers. Okay, source-to-source because it is converting one source code into another source code. And there are some core operations that a compiler performs, and let's see what those are. Verifying syntax and semantics of the source code is one of them. And this ensures that the source code complies with the rules of the programming language. For example, a program is made up of statements, and in case of Java, every statement must end with a semicolon. Okay, so that's a rule of Java programming language. And if a statement doesn't end with a semicolon, then the compiler detects it as a syntactic error and reports it to the developer. For example, here is a statement in Java that prints the text hello, and as you can see, the statement ends in a semicolon, and if we omit the semicolon, then the compiler reports it as a syntax error. Semantics is about meaning. For example, in Java, we write our programs as classes, and a class can also have something called a subclass, which is just another class but a specialized version of the original class. But if we declare the class with a keyword called final, then the compiler ensures that the class cannot have a subclass. So if we happen to define a subclass, then the compiler reports it as an error. So that's how the compiler is ensuring that the semantics associated with the final keyword is being respected. Okay, it's not being violated. Compilers also perform certain code optimizations for faster execution of the program. Okay, certain compilers do that. And finally, it generates machine code from the intermediate optimized code. Okay, so the optimization is done and then the machine code is generated from that. A compiler is a very complex program, and these core operations are basic operations that any compiler supports. And as you will see in this course, a Java compiler performs tons of additional operations to ease the programmer's task. So the compilation process can be slow due to the complexity in translation. However, once compiled, machine code execution will be very fast, and the machine code can be executed anytime and any number of times. But any change to the source code requires complete recompilation. Next, we will look at platform dependency, which will also give you an idea on how a C program is compiled on Windows and Linux machines. We are not going to write any code for the discussion, but towards the end of the chapter, we will write only one program. But as the course progresses, starting from the next section, we will write lots of programs. So that's about it. Thank you. And next we will look at platform dependency. Now let's look at interpreters, which address the platform dependency issue but have some other limitations. It's an interesting lecture, and sometimes even senior engineers do not really know how interpreters work. We know that in a compiled language, machine code is first generated by the compiler, and the generated machine code is then separately executed by the CPU. An interpreted language works differently. In an interpreted language, we have an interpreter, which is a program that directly executes the source code. That is, there is no separate compilation and execution step like in the case of a compiled language. As you can see here, input to the interpreter is the source code, and output is the result of execution of that source code. So you can see the similarity between an interpreter and a CPU. A CPU turns machine code into results, while an interpreter turns source code into results. So machine code serves as the instruction set for the CPU, while source code serves as the instruction set for the interpreter. Just note that interpreter is also a program and it needs to be run. So CPU executes the interpreter, and interpreter in turn executes the source code. So interpreter is nothing but a virtual machine that simulates a CPU. That is just the way a CPU executes machine language instructions using the fetch and execute cycle. An interpreter also executes instructions in the source code in a similar fetch and execute cycle. Let's now look at how a computer's fetch and execute cycle works. Fetch and execute cycle is the most fundamental operation of a computer, and every programmer must know it. In case you're not familiar with it, this brief discussion should be helpful. Now here we have a CPU, memory, and a hard disk with a program to be executed. When the program is executed or started, the program first gets loaded into memory. And we know that a program is the machine code and is basically a sequence of instructions where each instruction is simply a sequence of zeros and ones. Next, CPU fetches an instruction from the memory. and it then executes it. And in the process, it may also fetch any data needed to execute the instruction. Any data generated by the execution of the instruction will be written back to the memory. CPU then fetches the next instruction and executes it. So this cycle continues until all of the instructions in the program are executed. So that's basically the CPU's fetch and execute lifecycle. Now let's look at interpreter's fetch and execute cycle. Like a CPU, interpreter also fetches its instructions from the memory. However, in an interpreter's case, the instruction is basically a statement in the source code. It then understands what is necessary to carry out that statement. And these two steps are also done by a compiler. Next step would be to execute the program statement. And here is the interesting thing. Interpreter maintains a library of compiled machine code, and it just executes the appropriate compiled machine code that corresponds to the program statement. So the interpreter is not generating machine code. It simply uses its own compiled machine code to accomplish what the source code directs. Let's actually look at an example. Here we have an add statement in the source code, and the interpreter executes the corresponding compiled code from its library, which is the machine code version of this block of code that you see here. The code is fetching the two numbers to add from the memory, and then is performing the actual addition and is finally storing the output back in the memory. So once again, interpreter is not generating machine code. It just uses its library of pre-compiled machine code. One main advantage of interpreter is platform independence. As you can see in this illustration, the same source code can be executed on any of the platforms. Only requirement is to install an interpreter specific to the platform. Recall that with a compiled language, we could not achieve platform independence. That was because instead of source code, we were using machine code, which was platform dependent. That is, the machine code includes attributes specific to the platform on which it was generated. So the target platform on which the machine code is to be executed could have different set of attributes, and thus the machine code would fail to execute. But with an interpreted language, we are executing source code, which is identical regardless of the platform on which it is written. That is, it is platform independent. It is just that the interpreter on the target platform ensures that the platform independent source code is executed without any issues. Now let's look at the pros and cons of an interpreter. One advantage of an interpreter include platform independence, as we have just seen. Next, there is no compilation step. That is, the program execution can start immediately. I think one main advantage of not having a compilation step is that it would enable easier updates. For example, in some of my projects, there were instances where I had to fix bugs in the JavaScript code on production servers. JavaScript is an interpreted language, and so I could easily make the required code changes directly on production servers, which saved me a lot of time. Now, had it been a compiled language, I would have to make the changes externally, compile the code, and then deploy the compiled code onto production servers, which would consume a lot of valuable time. Now, in terms of limitations, interpretation is orders of magnitude slower than compiled code. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is due to costly memory access operations. For example, this is the library code from the add instruction example which we saw earlier. As you can see, there are several costly memory access operations. In a compiled language, it would have been taken care of in registers, which could result in code that runs very fast, probably even 100 times faster. Second reason for slowness is program has to be reinterpreted every single time it is run. Another limitation is that interpreter is loaded into memory along with the source code. So you have an extra program that is one of the unique selling points of Java is its platform independence capability without compromising on execution speed. And we know that it is because of JVM. Platform independence was possible as JVM installed on a particular platform can interpret Java bytecode without any issues. And since Java bytecode is designed specifically to be interpreted by JVM, we also get very fast execution speed. And we also said that JVM can additionally perform something called JIT compilation, which makes executing Java programs even more faster. Okay, so they can execute super fast. So JVM is the cornerstone of Java and it has other important benefits too. And it's a very sophisticated software. And it is so good that even programs written in other popular languages like Scala and Groovy can be compiled into Java bytecode, which can then be run on any JVM. That way, they also get the benefits of JVM, such as platform independence and fast execution speed. So to run on JVM, all you need to do is produce Java bytecode. Okay, so you need compilers which can produce Java bytecode. Since JVM plays such a vital role in making Java really attractive and making it one of the most popular languages out there, it is important to have a good understanding of JVM. We have a separate chapter dedicated to JVM, but at this point, let's at least get a good high-level understanding of JVM and also its architecture. And we will also see why Java programs run as fast as C or C++ programs. Okay, so it is very important to understand this instead of just diving into the code. Okay, so we need to know why Java programs run very fast. Java virtual machine is called virtual, and that's because it is an abstract computing machine. That is like a real computing machine. It has an instruction set which it executes, and its instruction set is the Java bytecode. So for a CPU, machine code serves as the instruction set, while for a JVM, Java bytecode serves as the instruction set. Unlike a real computing machine, JVM also manipulates memory at runtime. That is, it uses memory to run its programs and to manipulate their data. Note that the term runtime here refers to the time when the program is actually executed. And like I said earlier, JVM is the cornerstone of Java platform. And it has few core responsibilities, and one is loading and interpreting Java bytecode. We know that interpreting Java bytecode helps achieve platform independence along with fast execution speed. So it's a very fundamental responsibility of JVM. And next is security. Security is critical as Java was developed for a networked environment where programs can be downloaded from across the network. And you don't want those programs to perform any harmful activities on the user's machine. And third is automatic memory management. Unlike C or C++, Java relieves its programmers from directly manipulating memory. And it does that through its automatic memory management process. And this makes programming in Java easier and also makes Java programs a lot safer. That is, it will greatly minimize some really nasty memory related errors that one might make if they are manipulating the memory directly. And as we will soon see, JVM has separate components to manage these responsibilities. And before we look at what constitutes a JVM, let's first look at what happens when a Java program is run. Let's say we have a Java program called hello. And now when we execute this program using the command java space hello, an instance of JVM is created and is loaded into memory. JVM then in turn loads the hello program into memory and executes it. As you can see here, both JVM and the hello program are now in memory. So each Java application, like the hello program here, runs inside a JVM instance. Okay, so we can see the JVM instance here. Note that a JVM instance runs only one Java application. Now, if you want to run another program at the same time, then you can execute it separately. So for instance, while the hello program is running, if you want to run another program, let's call it as goodbye, then you would say java space goodbye and that would create yet another instance of JVM, which will then execute the goodbye.class. So two JVM instances are being run at the same time, just like the way you can have two instances of your browser running at the same time. And now let's look at a typical architecture of JVM. Let's assume we have a Java program called hello.java, which is compiled. Next, we need to run it, and so we would say java space hello, and we know with that JVM will be launched. That is, it will be loaded into memory, as we just saw in the previous slide. And at the same time, JVM will also get a chunk of memory from the underlying operating system, and we are referring it as the runtime data areas. Okay, so it's just the JVM memory. JVM now has to load hello.class, which includes the Java bytecode. For this, JVM invokes a component called class loader, which, as the name implies, locates hello.class and loads the corresponding bytecode into memory. So as the name class loader suggests, it loads the class. And when we say memory, it would be these two areas called heap and method area. Next, the bytecodes are verified by a component called bytecode verifier. And this is to ensure that the loaded class file is not corrupted. And this is very critical because in certain Java applications, we know that classes can be downloaded from across the internet, like in the case of applets. And those classes could have been created by some hackers. So bytecode verification is critical to ensure the integrity of JVM. Once the bytecode has been verified, and if there are no issues, then it can be safely executed by the execution engine, which includes the Java interpreter along with a JIT compiler. So the interpreter here interprets the Java bytecode. So this execution engine, which includes the interpreter and JIT compiler, gives us the benefit of platform independence and very fast execution speed. So it handles one of the core responsibilities of JVM, which we discussed earlier. Garbage collector is the component that is responsible for automatic memory management, which, as we mentioned earlier, is another core responsibility of JVM. And as the name implies, garbage collector collects the garbage in our program, which would be things that are no longer useful. And it means it would reclaim the memory accessed by those things. Next, security manager is responsible for ensuring security, which is another core responsibility of JVM. For example, if you want to restrict any bytecode from accessing your file system, then security manager can ensure this by running the bytecode in a more restricted environment called the sandbox environment. Finally, there are also few other components that constitute a JVM, but let's not worry about them. I think we discussed some of the main ones here, and it should have given you a fair idea about what constitutes a JVM. In JVM internals chapter, we will discuss many of these components in detail. Now, let's spend a little bit of time discussing the JIT compiler, as it plays a critical role in making Java programs run very fast, just like in the case of C or C++. We already discussed this. Interpreting Java bytecode is much faster than interpreting source code. This is because bytecode is designed specifically for JVM and is already compiled and also sometimes optimized. So let's see how JIT or just-in-time compilation helps in further speeding up the execution. So as the program is executing and bytecode is being interpreted, JVM monitors frequency of execution of each piece of executed bytecode. Some of the code is more frequently executed than others, and the frequently executed code is referred to as hotspots. Hotspots are then given to JIT compiler, which is a component of JVM, as we just saw, and JIT compiler converts these hotspots to machine code. And this machine code is then cached, which means that it is saved in memory for future use. And in future, whenever there is a need to execute these hotspots, the corresponding cached machine code is what gets executed, resulting in much faster performance. Rest of the code is still interpreted by the interpreter. So the frequently executed code, that is the hotspots, is not interpreted every single time. Its corresponding cache machine code is what gets executed directly. And this JIT compilation is referred to as dynamic compilation, as the compilation into machine code is done dynamically at runtime. Now let's just try to understand this JIT compilation process through a simple example. Let's consider that we have these two methods called foo and bar. In some programming languages, methods are just referred to as functions. Okay, so in Java, we call them as methods, and we will discuss methods in the next chapter. Essentially, they are blocks of code that represent certain logic to be executed. Here, foo represents some logic and bar would represent something else. Now let's consider that this method bar here has 50 lines of code. Now at runtime, the byte code corresponding to each of these 50 lines of code is interpreted and the corresponding machine code is executed. Now this happens the first time the method is executed, and it also happens the second time, and so on until say 1000 times. And every single time, the byte code corresponding to every line of code here is interpreted, and its corresponding machine code is executed. Now that it ran for 1000 times, this code in bar method could be considered as frequently executed code. So JVM would designate it as hotspot. And with that, JIT compiler would then kick in and it would generate its own machine code version of this entire method. And JIT compiler, like a regular compiler, could have done some optimizations too when it is generating this machine code. And this JIT generated machine code is then cached. And when bar is executed for 1001st time, the cached machine code will be executed directly. So there is no more interpretation of the byte code corresponding to the 50 lines of code that the bar method has. Since machine code is being executed directly, it would run very fast, just like code written in C or C++, where CPU executes compiled machine code directly. Okay, so you can see that there is no difference here. So that's why Java is considered as almost as fast as languages like C or C++. Now here, if bar is executed for say 2000 times, then it might trigger another round of optimization by the JIT compiler for further speed up of execution. Note that method foo may not be that frequently executed and hence might be interpreted every single time. So this is how conceptually a JIT compiler would work. The actual way in which it works could differ slightly, but conceptually this is how it would work. So that's about it, and that's a high-level overview of JVM, and you can see that it's a very highly sophisticated piece of software that makes Java programs run very fast and securely and also in platform independent way. Thank you.